Hello, everyone. I'm Sergeant Major of the Army, retired Dan Dailey, and welcome to this edition of Soldier Today Podcast. Soldier Today Podcast is a product of the Non-Commissioned Officer and Soldier Programs Directorate at the Association of the United States Army. Soldier Today subjects focus on those topics that are relevant and needed by our soldiers and their families, serving the regular Army, Army National Guard, and the Army Reserve. Our newest topic of discussion today is the District of Columbia Army National Guard. For over 200 years, the District of Columbia National Guard has held the vital responsibility of protecting the nation's capital. Through times of peace and times of war, the D.C. National Guard has honored its commitments to the nation and the District of Columbia. The D.C. National Guard has been there from the fields of France and the beaches of Normandy to the skies above D.C. on 9/11, and is still there, ready and vigilant. Service in the D.C. National Guard is part of a long tradition of dedication, bravery, and valor that dates back to the efforts of President Thomas Jefferson, the first president to serve a term in the newly created District of Columbia. You can read more on the history of the Capitol Guardians, protecting the Capitol and defending the nation since 1802 by exploring the history section of the D.C. National Guard website at dc.ng.mil, or visit the online D.C. Capitol Guardian Museum. We are honored to have with us today Command Sergeant Major Michael F. Brooks, the Senior Enlisted Leader of the District of Columbia National Guard. So, Command Sergeant Major Brooks, thanks for joining us here on the Soldier Today podcast show. I, as well as our listeners, know that you have been very busy the past couple of weeks. So thanks for taking the time out of your important schedule to share the D.C. Army National Guard story with us today. Sergeant Major, welcome.
SMA, it's a privilege and an honor to be here, get an opportunity to tell a little bit of our great organization, the D.C. National Guard. It has been quite a busy time, but happy to be here.
We're happy to have you, Sergeant Major, and we're proud of what you and the D.C. National Guard soldiers and all the Army National Guard soldiers are doing to protect our country, not just through recent events, but throughout all time and all history, and most importantly this year, because our nation has been through a lot. So, Sergeant Major, I'd like to jump right in with some questions if you're ready, and that's okay.
Sure, sounds good.
So, Sergeant Major Brooks, I thought we'd begin by supporting our SMA's initiative. This is something I do with all of our senior enlisted guests that have joined us on the show recently. The SMA's initiative, This Is My Squad. SMA Grinston has said time and time again how important it is to get to know the members of your squad. So could you share with our listeners a little bit about yourself? Like, where'd you grow up and why did you decide to become a soldier?
I was born in Tampa, Florida, but I grew up most of my life on the East Coast around Ormond Beach, Florida. Basically a middle-income family, if you will. My father worked construction, and then about the age of 13, my mother became a nurse. You know, typical kid growing up, didn't really know about what kind of status my family was because they always ensured we had a lot of love in the family, so we were good with that. Hardworking family. About the time I graduated high school, I started attending the local community college, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do at the time with my life. I was taking classes and really didn't have a lot of direction in which way they were going. And about that time, my uncle, Peter John Boyens, he was a Vietnam veteran. He actually served 2 tours in Vietnam. He actually made the suggestion to give the Army a try so that I could kind of broaden my experience and figure out what I wanted to do with my life. In 1993, I joined the Army and shipped off to Fort Benning, Georgia. Initially, I thought I would probably do about 3 years, figure out what to do with my life, and then go back to college. But as it turned out the military is what I wanted to do. I spent a little more than 11 years in the active component, served 6 years with 1st of 325 in the 82nd Airborne Division, served a year in Korea as a PLDC instructor at the 8th Army NCO Academy, served a tour at the S3 Air NCO for Dragon Brigade of 18th Airborne Corps before I was selected to serve with the Old Guard there in Virginia at Fort Myer. So interestingly, as a member of the Old Guard, I was actually a first responder to the events of 9/11 as part of the remains and recovery teams that entered the Pentagon shortly after the attack. In fact, my wife, Jennifer Brooks, who's also a veteran, she doesn't serve anymore, but she was actually serving in the Pentagon on that day herself. She's fine, of course. We have 3 beautiful children, 2 daughters, Kaylee and Samantha, and my son, Michael. But those events certainly changed both of our trajectories in our service. About 3 years later, as a sergeant first class with more than 10 years of service, I decided to make a change to try and find a little more stability for my family as our older children were reaching high school age. And that's about 2004 when I was trying to figure out what I was going to do after our ETS. I actually met a sergeant first class, Sylvia Lynch, who at the time was a National Guard recruiter. She had told me about the Active Guard Reserve program, which I had never heard about before. She gave me some information. I went to the D.C. National Guard and applied and was actually hired before I actually left active duty. I never had a break in service basically PCS to the DC National Guard. And for the past 16 years, I've been serving with the DC National Guard in different capacities. It's been truly a blessing to me and my family to have that time and a chance to serve with the DC National Guard.
Well, Sergeant Major, thanks for sharing that incredible story. And you started off with, you didn't know how interesting it would be. Well, I can tell you, that's incredibly interesting and an incredible journey through some incredibly historic and important times. And I just want to tell you, I want to thank you for your service in both the active and now the National Guard, as well as your spouse, too. So thank you. 9/11 was a tragic time for this nation and a turning point for many of us. And we appreciate that you made the decision to stay on, maybe in another capacity, but your service is felt and much appreciated as you transition from the active to the National Guard. And we're going to learn more about that in our conversation here about the importance of what our National Guard soldiers do. So, Sergeant Major, let's transition right in there. Why is the National Guard in the District of Columbia and each of the states and territories, for that matter, so important to the United States of America?
You know, that's an interesting question. A lot of people don't know that the National Guard is the oldest military in the United States. It actually dates back to the original colonies and the first militias of 1636. We're essentially the nation's reserve force. We train to the same standards as the active component. We deploy and fight our nation's wars abroad. However, for me, I think the most important role is the defense and support of our communities here in the homeland. Without getting into those lengthy discussions on U.S. code and the differences between a Title 32, Title 10, or a Title 5, and, the discussion of posse comitatus, the National Guard under Title 32 is uniquely designed to support civil authorities during natural disasters or times of civil unrest, in large part to their ability to function in a law enforcement role, something that is actually illegal for our Title 10 brothers and sisters.
Well, thanks for that, Sergeant Major. And you're right. Most people see a soldier in uniform and they think that they're the same. And they are with regards to their knowledge, skills, and abilities. But the uniqueness is that there's a lawful difference between a National Guard soldier and an active duty soldier. And like you said, that conversation can get very detailed. I would just advise our listeners out there, if you want to learn more about it, you can Google it and look at the difference between a Title 10 and Title 32, or as Sergeant Major mentioned, Title 5. Sergeant Major, but there's a uniqueness about the organization you specifically lead. The National Guard has a unique role and mission in both service to their state and territory, as you described, as well as the defense of the nation when called to duty on active duty. But the DC National Guard is quite unique. Can you share the difference between the state's National Guards and the DC or the District of Columbia National Guard?
Sure. Most Americans don't know the District of Columbia has a National Guard because it's just a city and it's not a state or a territory of the United States. In the other 53 National Guards, a governor has control over the Guard and how they're used within their states, and also a little bit of input as to how they're used for a federal mission as well. But here in the District of Columbia National Guard, it's unique because, in fact, we report directly to the President of the United States. So around 1949, it was delegated that day-to-day supervision from the President through the Secretary of Defense to the Secretary of the Army as our chain of command. As you mentioned at the beginning, President Thomas Jefferson was the founder of the DC National Guard. And this is going to sound kind of eerily similar to what we see going on today, especially considering the events that we've had in our nation recently. But when President Jefferson became president, it was actually during a time when the strife between the two major political parties of the times was threatening to tear the country apart. And what President Jefferson, being the first president to serve his term in the new capital city, quickly realized was that the powerful militias aligned with the governors in Maryland and Virginia could really march unopposed into the nation's capital, and there was a risk of their ability to force political will or even overthrow the fledgling government. So President Jefferson took what we believe to be the necessary steps to prevent this by creating the District of Columbia National Guard, which remains under the command and control of the Commander-in-Chief. In fact, we are the only Guard whose commanding general and the adjutant general are actually appointed by the President. And we have the only national mission within the Guard of protecting the government, which is why we earn our name, of course, Capitol Guardians, and our motto, protecting the Capitol and defending the nation since 1802.
Sergeant Major Brooks, thanks for laying that out for us and describing that, because it is a unique role that the DC National Guard plays. And thanks for sharing the perspective on the history, which is important to understand why and for what purpose it was created. Recently, Sergeant Major, the DC National Guard was activated. Now, we don't want to get into the details of that, but Could you please share with our listeners the process of how the DC National Guard is called to duty in our nation's capital? Because there was a lot of talk of this on the news, but could you lay it out in soldier terms for us so our listeners can understand?
Sure. Most Americans would recognize the normal process for most of the National Guards in the country, which is, there's a need for support or a request. It goes to that state's governor. That governor contacts his adjutant general and authorizes the use of his National Guard forces within the state. It's a little different in D.C. because we don't have a governor. SEC Army kind of plays that military governor role. So our process is essentially 7 steps. It sounds lengthy, but it really happens fairly quickly. So the commanding general would receive a request for assistance from the mayor or the director of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. The commanding general would then conduct a mission analysis, and we would submit that request to the SEC Army. Then the SEC Army would consult with the U.S. Attorney General. The U.S. Attorney General advises the SEC Army. The SEC Army consults with the Secretary of Defense, and then the SEC Army approves, disapproves, or approves with parameters or restrictions the support. And then, of course, the commanding general would notify the mayor or the director of HSEMA of the approval. The whole process can be done fairly quickly, even though it sounds lengthy. And in the case of a true emergency, our commanding general actually has immediate and emergency response authority to protect imminent loss of life, property, and to protect federal functions as well. Now, the majority of time, we are well in advance notified of upcoming events that our support might be requested, and we are pre-postured to give that support for most significant events. Because as you know, the National Guard is not a full-time response force, and it takes time to alert, assemble, and deploy from a cold start, if you will.
Well, thanks for sharing that. That was a great lay down of exactly how you go through the process of activating the Guard. So I want to give our listeners some perspective of the level of importance or the impact of this. We obviously saw that in the recent events, right? And we felt it. And the nation felt it. But how often does this happen?
It actually happens more often than you would think, especially here in the nation's capital. It's a huge deal to activate the National Guard. The National Guard is a community-based organization, and when Guardsmen are activated, many of these service members are community leaders, first responders, business owners, primary caregivers. The impact of their activation is often much farther reaching than just the support they're providing. Many Guardsmen actually incur hardships when they are activated unexpectedly for lengthy duty for different reasons. Some it's a financial hardship because maybe their civilian job pays more than their military pay, or they have incurred additional or emergency childcare costs. Others may be college students who now, because they've been on an extended active period, are unable to complete their course of study. In the case of a small town who has a small police force or a small fire department, you might be taking somebody away from those elements, and that could impact them significantly. So I would say there's definitely a significant impact anytime you activate the National Guard, which is why it should not be taken lightly. When a citizen needs assistance from law enforcement, they call the non-emergency police number or they dial 911. Well, the National Guard in its defense support to civil authority role is essentially that 911 for law enforcement. So you wouldn't call 911 because you saw a loose dog, but if it was a true emergency, you're going to call. And that's what we think the Guard should be, is that last resort, if you will. With all that said, the DC National Guard is still activated several times each year in support of large crowd-producing events like Independence Day, First Amendment marches, events like the Papal Visit, global summits, and other major demonstrations held within the Capitol. During these situations, what we do is we provide the emergency support functions like traffic control, site security, and crowd management so that the law enforcement can focus on enforcing the laws and deterring other criminal activity. We don't really want to get into that, even though we can under Title 32. We don't really want to get into that law enforcement role within the civil authorities.
Understand, Sergeant Major. Yeah, that's an important perspective for our listeners out there. We appreciate you providing that to us. So, Sergeant Major, again, we saw what happened and why you were called a few weeks ago. But following that was the inauguration of the president. What is the District of Columbia's National Guard's role in that inauguration?
That's another interesting case. The National Guard can trace its support to the presidential inauguration all the way back to the inauguration of our first president, George Washington, when elements of the state militias of the time escorted President George Washington to then New York, which was the seat of our government at the time. And while there has always been a National Guard presence in inaugural ceremonies, the DC National Guard specifically has been responsible for supporting the security of the presidential inauguration since 1861 with the inauguration of President Abraham Lincoln. Back then, leading up to the 1861 inauguration, assassination threats against the president were widely known. There were actual cavalry units of the D.C. National Guard that were ordered to ride alongside President Lincoln's carriage during his procession to the Capitol, and they would buck their horses to create distractions so that snipers could not get a clear shot of the president on his procession to the Capitol.
This isn't something new for the D.C. National Guard in inauguration. This is something that you've been doing throughout history.
Absolutely. Every 4 years, the D.C. National Guard is responsible for, in the early days, we were solely responsible for the security. With the development of other agencies, the law enforcement agencies, United States Secret Service, and others, now we are the primary command and control element as well as the primary planners for military support, which is heavily focused from a Guard perspective on the security of the event, not so much the ceremonial piece. From 1861 till about 2009, we did that on our own, but with the increased size expected for the inauguration of President Barack Obama, who was the first African-American elected president, we actually brought in an additional 10,000 Guardsmen to support the safe and peaceful transfer of presidential power. Now, this wasn't because of credible threats like there was back in 1861. It was just due to the enormous size of the crowds present that day to witness that historic event. But today, as I mentioned, the D.C. National Guard remains the command and control element and the primary planning cell for military support, even as we bring in these additional members like we have recently.
So I'm to understand that even the role in the D.C.'s National Guard in the inauguration and those events is something that's been going on all throughout our history. And even asking for assistance is something that's occurred in previous inaugurations too. So this isn't something new for this year.
No, size has definitely increased, but not a new event for us, no.
Well, sorry, Major. Thanks for sharing that perspective and give us an understanding of the important role that the D.C. National Guard and our fellow state National Guard soldiers have played in our inaugurations throughout history. Sergeant Major Brooks, we discussed a lot about the D.C. National Guard's role in supporting and protecting the Capitol, but they have another mission. How does the D.C. National Guard support the defense of the nation?
That's kind of an easy answer. Though we're one of the smallest National Guards, most of the D.C. National Guards have deployed multiple times in support of overseas combat operations in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and we continue to deploy overseas support operations today. But one of the unique ways we support the initiatives of the Department of Defense is through the United States National Guard State Partnership Program. A lot of people don't know about this program. It was initiated back in 1993, and what it does is it allows National Guard units from all 54 to partner with partner nations around the world so that we can help develop relationships long-term with the Guard to help with their development and so forth. So the D.C. National Guard specifically, we have 2 partner nations that we partner with as part of this program. We've been partners with the country of Jamaica for a little over 20 years, and we recently, in 2019, signed on a new partner with Burkina Faso in Africa. This partnership affords the opportunity for our members to travel to these partner nations and conduct military engagements on a variety of subjects that are mainly focused on, of course, the development of the relationships, the professional development of the military leaders, and of course, in support of the DoD security cooperation programs. It's a huge benefit for our service members who actually get to see other parts of the world that they may not otherwise get to. And from a military standpoint, if we build these relationships now, in the future, if we ever have to send troops to a conflict somewhere out in the world, it's nice to know we already have partners that we've worked with, we have a clear understanding with, they understand the U.S., we understand them, and it's just better all around as far as the support to the Department of Defense.
Sergeant Brooks, I agree. I am a huge fan of the states and the D.C. National Guard's partnership with our Foreign Country Alliance. I've seen it in action both here in the United States, the collaboration, and overseas. It is just a phenomenal program, and I know that you and your partner nations are growing together each day as you move forward in those relationships. Sergeant Major Brooks, we're out of time, and I wish we could spend the rest of the day because I know our listeners want me to ask you many questions, but your time is very valuable. And like you said, you're still very hard at work there in our nation's capital. It was a pleasure to have you with us today, and we hope you'll come back and join us, and I know you will. But I'd like to give you the last words. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to provide our listeners?
I really would like just to take the opportunity to thank all the Guardsmen who, in the true spirit of the Minuteman, dropped what they were doing and came to the support of the Capitol response. And of course, their families. We can't do this without the support of our families. And without the help of these Guardsmen that came from all 54 states, territories, and the district, we would not have been able to accomplish the historical security effort that was in place for the 59th presidential inauguration. I would also like to thank you and AUSA for the opportunity to be here and share the story of the District of Columbia National Guard. It is truly a unique organization with a tremendous amount of history. I know we only briefly touched on it, but I encourage all your listeners to take a look at it because it is incredible when you really get into where we started, where we've come, and all the truly great accomplishments we've had in the years.
Well, thank you, Sergeant Major. And as Sergeant Major said, if you want to learn more about the history or just what our DC National Guard is doing, check out their website at dc.ng.mil or visit their online DC Capitol Guardian Museum. Our time has come to an end to close this edition of Soldier Today podcast. And all of us here at the Association of United States Army want to thank Command Sergeant Major Brooks for joining us today and for sharing his story and giving us an important update on the District of Columbia Army National Guard. As Army alums, I can say from all of us across the country, thank you, Sergeant Major, and the entire team for what you have done and all that you continue to do for our Army and the American people.
To all our listeners, thanks for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to the Army Matters podcast on iTunes and everywhere podcasts are found. The Army Matters podcast series is brought to you by the Association of the United States Army, the U.S. Army's professional association, member-supported, Army-connected. Visit us at AUSA.org for more information or to become a member. Your membership helps AUSA continue to carry out its mission to educate, inform, and connect with the total Army, our industry partners, and our supporters of a strong national defense. For questions or to provide topic recommendations, email us at podcast@ausa.org. Have a great Army Day. Hua.